welcome to Applicata Biblia. My name is Mark. Thank you so much for stopping by again. We are continuing in this series, A Walk Through the Bible, or Bible Characters, 30,000 foot view of the Bible so we can understand the structure of the Bible, how it's put together, and kind of reveal God through how he deals with his people. We are currently in the time of the kings, and we kind of looked at a timeline on that briefly, and we are about 1,000 years before Jesus comes. So, within the Christian timeline, it's about 1,000 years before Jesus shows up. We talked about Saul in the last lesson. Saul started out as a pretty good king, and then he kind of goes off the rails and lets his power cloud his judgment. So it's important to see, as we talked about in the last time, God rejects Saul as king, but he remains king for a good amount of time. And in chapter 16, Samuel goes and anoints David. And again, I would suggest you read through that in 1 Samuel. It's important to see that, just how that worked. It's a beautiful story. Samuel goes to Jesse's house and sees these big strapping young men of his, that are his sons, and he thinks that one of these guys are going to be the king, and God keeps telling him, no, that's not the guy. No, that's not the guy. He goes through all of his sons, and he goes, have you got any more sons? And he goes, well, there's David. He's out tending the sheep. He's just a little grunt, And they bring David in, and God says, yeah, he's the guy. So David's anointed king at this very young age, and that was in 1 Samuel chapter 16. So it isn't long after that he slays Goliath. Another great story. You should look that up. There's so much meaning behind it. Here's this little, maybe not little, and not really that young, but this young man who doesn't look like a warrior, definitely, but is so faithful for God that when they are taunting the armies of God, David takes it personally. He's like, where's this guy? I'll get him. And everybody's going, get out of here, you little runt, he's just a skinny young man, or I'm assuming. But David has great faith. He talks about how God has delivered him from a bear and a lion, and so David does it. He kills Goliath, and he starts getting popular. Now he's anointed by God, but he's not king yet. Saul is still king, and Saul has to kind of befriend David because he killed this giant, right? And so he comes into Saul's palace or house, and he befriends Jonathan. And that is a beautiful friendship as well. Jonathan knows that David loves God. And I don't know that it is really known that David is the new anointed one. I don't think he goes around bragging about it very often or at all. But eventually Saul understands that David will be the next king. So Saul hates David in that sense. He loves David, but he hates David. And Saul it's like he goes mad, and he just starts hunting. He's trying to hunt down David. Jonathan helps him. Michal, Saul's daughter, helps him. And it's important to see that God is with David while Saul's just chasing him all around. David starts his own little army of a bunch of worthless fellows that he meets up with, and they become part of his army. And so Saul's chasing him around, and David's just dodging him, and because God's helping him. And eventually, by chapter 27, he goes and lives with the Philistines because he's like, why should I keep running away from Saul? Eventually he's going to kill me. I'm just going to go live with the Philistines. So he goes live with the Philistines for a while, and they accept him, which is really strange. And then eventually Saul dies, in 1 Samuel chapter 31. And then David is anointed king a couple of more times just so the people can accept him, because this is not the house of Saul. Okay? So it's important to see he's anointed a couple more times just so people understand that David is indeed the king. So it's important to see a lot of this stuff, and he is absolutely accepted by the people. I mean, it's important to see that he kills Goliath, and when he does that, he gains a lot of respect by the people. And so this is him, king, moving forward. He's taking on these different wives. He's conquering a lot of land, a lot of people, a lot of the enemies of Israel. He's a great king in this sense. He loves God. He has great faith in God. David is very much a passionate man. He writes love songs for God about his law and about who God is. He's just an all-around really good guy and a great king. But like everybody, he ends up sinning. And this is what we're going to look at today. And so I wanted to kind of contrast Saul's reaction to what he does when he sins against God to David's reaction. And we see God accepting one and not the other. And we'll get into the why of that here in a minute. So we're going to be reading from 2 Samuel chapter 11. So this is, all these things have already happened that I just talked about in David's life. He's already an established king, and all these things have happened. One of the other things that happens is the Ark of the Covenant is actually returned to Jerusalem, which is a big deal. They had lost the Ark of the Covenant, and it was never a good thing for the people who were trying to keep it. That wasn't Israel. Their people would die, and they would put it next to their idol, and the idol would fall over. All these things were happening. And also, God promises David, he makes some promises to him. One is that there would be a perpetuity of his lineage on the throne for Israel. And forever. And I only want to bring this up because whenever you see these forever promises, the only way that can be accomplished is through Jesus. That is, Jesus is the forever king that we see come from David, and that's why David is so important. David wants to build the temple for God, and God tells him, look, you've shed blood. I can't have you do that. But your son Solomon will build the temple for me. So David gets all the things ready for his son Solomon. So all of these things are happening, and then we have this story of Bathsheba and David. And we're going to get into it. There's a lot of things I'm not going to address. There's a lot of things that are not really answerable, but we're going to get into some of it. So chapter 11, 14 through 27. And it happened in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, who was his general, and sent it by the hand of Uriah. Okay, I better bring us up to speed. David is supposed to, as a king, is supposed to go out into battle. Okay, first mistake is he doesn't go out into battle with his troops. First mistake. And he's on his balcony, and he looks down, and there's this lady, this beautiful woman. She's naked as the day she was born, taking a bath, and he's overcome by his own lust. And he inquires of some of his servants. He says, "Who's that lady down there living next to us, and who shares this courtyard with them, obviously?" And they say, "Oh, that's Bathsheba. She's the wife of Uriah." And he says, "Well, go get her for me and bring her here." So she comes to him, and he takes her. And there's a lot to be said about that, but he takes her, and she has relations with him, and she cleans up and goes home, and she ends up pregnant, right? She's carrying David's baby. So this is the plan that David devises since, I got this guy's wife pregnant. It happened in the morning. David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. So why is Uriah there? Well, this is because he's the husband of Bathsheba. Well, he first thinks, I'll have Uriah come back here and tell him to go be with your wife. So she's pregnant, but she's pregnant with my child, right? Yeah, whatever. It's all right. Uriah is so noble, he will not go be with his wife. And David's like, "Why not?" He's like, "Well, I can't go to be with my wife while all of my fellow soldiers are on the front lines and they're dying. I mean, and they're fighting, and I can't do this. I can't do that." So here's this guy, Uriah. He's so noble and just. And so what does David think? Okay, plan B. Here's the plan. Verse 15. And he wrote in the letter, and he sends it by the guy Uriah himself. Place Uriah in front of the strongest battle and withdraw from him that he may be struck and die. And it happened as Joab watched the city that he sent Uriah to the place where he knew there would be mighty men. And the men of the city went out and fought with Joab, and some of the people fell of David's servants, and Uriah the Hittite also died. And Joab sent and told David all the matters of the war, and he commanded the messenger, saying, as you finish all the matters of the war, speaking to the king, then it shall be if the king's fury rises, and he says to you, "Why did you draw near to the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from afar off the wall? Who killed Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth? Did not a woman throw a piece of a riding millstone on him from the wall? And he died in Thebez? Why did you draw near to the wall? Then you shall say, also, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." And the messengers went and came and told David all that which Joab had told him to tell. And the messenger said to David, "Surely the men have been mighty against us and came out to us in the field, and we were on them to the entrance of the gate. And those shooting shot at your servants from the wall, and some of the servants of the king were dead, and also your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." And David said to the messenger, You shall say to Joab, "Do not let this thing be evil in your eyes, for the sword devours one as well as another. Make your battle stronger against the city and overthrow it, and make him strong." And Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, and she mourned for her husband. And the mourning time passed by, and David sent and gathered to her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. And the thing which David had done was evil in the eyes of Jehovah. So describe David's plan. Well, it's pretty simple. He tells Joab, and this is the creepy part about it. It's creepy that he's conspiring for murder, first of all. But it's creepy that he writes this letter and gives it to Joab to take, the guy who's going to be killed because of this. And he just tells Joab, you put him at the front line and you put him in a position where he's going to get killed by the enemy. That's basically what he says. Does it work? Well, of course it works. Yeah, he gets killed. Does it work overall? Well, no, of course not. God's not going to let this stand. This was evil in the eyes of God. What is Joab's concern in verses 18 through 20, and what is his solution? Well, I don't know if he thought David was going to forget or protest or something, because you just don't go up to the wall and start fighting because they have all these defenses, right? I mean, this king was killed by a woman throwing this millstone over the edge of the wall. Why would you come close to the wall? And if he says anything like that, you just tell him Uriah's dead. And then basically, since Uriah, you did the thing, then it was okay for this to happen. This is just so that the messenger wouldn't get into trouble. Well, the messenger seemed to know something because he includes the fact that Uriah was killed in his explanation. And David just goes, oh, well, okay, well, tell Joab that, these things happen. Just, next time do better. It's all really, really terrible. And David puts his general, who's not really that great of a guy to begin with, Joab. Joab's good and not good. He's really up and down throughout all of this story with David. But he sticks with David, and he really does take care of David a lot. But it's really kind of creepy, the whole thing, the way it goes down. Okay, chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. And Jehovah sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said to him, there were two men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich one had many flocks and very many herds, but the poor one had nothing except one little ewe lamb, which he had bought and nourished, and it grew up with him and with his sons together, and it ate of his morsel, and it drank from his cup, and it lay in his bosom. And it was like a daughter to him. And a traveler came to the rich one, and he spared of his own flock and of his own herd to prepare for the traveler who had come to him. And he took the ewe lamb of the poor man and prepared it for the man who had come to him. And David's anger glowed greatly against the man. And as he said to Nathan, as Jehovah lives, surely the man who did this is a son of death, and he shall repay fourfold for the ewe lamb, because he has done this thing, and because he had no pity. So what was the purpose of Nathan's story, and did it work? Well, we'll find out in a second if it worked. But the purpose, of course, of Nathan's story, because it's a message of God, is it's a parable. It's a parable, right? You have somebody who has all this great power, and he abuses his power over somebody with less power. And this is really what the story is all about, David abusing his power. He abuses his power over Bathsheba. He abuses his power over her husband, wrecks the family. And later on, imagine, Uriah wasn't a Jew. And imagine, having a son and realizing that the king had your son killed. Doesn't do well for David even later. Okay, verses 7 through 9. And Nathan said to David, you are the man. So says Jehovah, the God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you out of the hand of Saul. And I gave you the house of your master and your master's wives into your bosom. And I gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that were too little, then I would have added to these things. Why have you despised the word of Jehovah to do the evil in his eyes? You have stricken Uriah the Hittite by the sword and have taken his wife to yourself as a wife. And you have killed him by the sword, by the sons of Ammon. So what has God done for David? And what evil has David committed? And this is, a couple of things that are kind of controversial. But first and foremost, what did David do? Well, he conspired for murder, which makes him murderer. God says, you killed Uriah the Hittite. And he's committed adultery, not against his other wives, because it was common for a king to have multiple wives. But he committed adultery against Uriah. And he made Bathsheba commit adultery. And people say, no, they didn't commit adultery. And they try to get around it by saying, because Uriah was a soldier, he would give her a writ of divorce before he goes into battle, so that if he dies, she's released from the marriage. And I say to that, well, okay, that's fine, except when they had these relations, they were still married. Uriah was not dead. So the writ of divorce wouldn't happen unless the guy died. So that's not even a moot point. You can't even argue it, because that's not the way it happened. What has God done for David? God's telling him, and this is what he tells us, that's what he told Saul. I've done all these things for you, and this is what you're doing. Why are you doing this? And God is just putting it right in David's lap. He's going, he's basically saying, God is saying, I know what you did. Stop lying. Stop all of this treachery that you're performing. Stop it. And again, it's the same thing. You're putting your own wants and needs and wishes, like Saul wanted to save face. God says it's idolatry. You're putting these things over the things that I'm telling you to do. You're making them more important than me. 10 through 12. And now the sword shall not turn aside from your house continually, because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be a wife to you. So says Jehovah, behold, I shall raise up evil against you out of your house, and shall take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you acted in secret, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. So all of these things end up happening to David. Absalom becomes this guy who tries to take over David's kingdom, his own son. All these things happen. And that's the consequence, right? David loses respect before the people. Think of, if you're a servant in David's house and you see that he's done these terrible things, and it's like, what happened to this guy? I thought you loved God. Remember, God is your God, and all the things you used to say about, you've written all these songs about God, and now you're doing this. So I'm not saying people rebelled against David in his own house. When David dies, his kingdom is intact, but from within his own family, he has issues. Okay, verses 13 through 23. David said to Nathan, and this is important, this is the contrast I want us to see between Saul and David. Nathan, when David is confronted with his own sin, I have sinned against Jehovah. And Nathan said to David, Jehovah also has put away your sin. You shall not die. Only because you have made the enemies of Jehovah to scorn derisively by this thing, also the son who shall be born to you, dying, shall die. And Nathan went to his house, and Jehovah struck the boy whom the former wife of Uriah had borne to David, and it became sick. And David sought God for the child, and David fasted a fast and went in and stayed the night and lay on the earth. And the elders of his house rose up toward him to raise him up from the earth. But he was not willing, and he ate no bread with them. And it happened on the seventh day the boy died. And David's servants feared to tell him that the boy was dead. For they said, behold, while the boy was alive, he spoke to him. We spoke to him, and he would not listen to our voice. And how shall we say to him, the boy is dead? Then he may do harm. In other words, he may harm himself. And David saw that his servants were whispering among themselves, and David understood that the boy was dead. And David said to his servants, is the boy dead? And they said, he is dead. And David rose up from the earth and bathed and anointed and changed his clothing and came to the house of Jehovah and worshipped. And he came to his house and commanded, and they brought bread for him, and he ate. And his servant said to him, what is this thing you have done? You fasted and wept because of the living boy, yet when the boy is dead, you have risen up and have eaten food? And he said, while the boy was alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who knows? Jehovah may be gracious to me, and the boy may stay alive. And now he has died. Why this, that I should fast? Am I able to bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. So how is it that David receives forgiveness? Is David delivered from the consequences of his sin? And what does it mean to be forgiven of a sin by God? And these are the kind of the parameters that Jesus reveals better when he comes and people better understand God. But David is demonstrating it long before Jesus shows up. And that is, take responsibility for your sin and stop doing it, right? Repentance means to change your mind about things. Being converted means you stop doing those things. And obviously we slip up, but not sinning should be the paradigm of the Christian life. How is it that David received forgiveness? He just simply threw himself at God's mercy. And that's what we do today as Christians through the Christ. Now, people might say he didn't receive forgiveness until Jesus came along. I don't know. The stroke that was due to David was death for murder and adultery. That was the stroke, according to the law, that was due to David. But God stayed the hand of the executioner. And the only difference that I can see between him and Saul is that he took responsibility and threw himself on the mercy of God. And wasn't trying to save face. He didn't believe Bathsheba, oh, she was out there naked and I saw her and I couldn't help myself. He doesn't say that. He just says, I sinned. And God knew his heart. That's what God's looking for. He isn't looking for the sacrifice like Samuel told Saul. He isn't looking for your sacrifice. He's looking for you to look to him. Stop making idols. Sin is your new idol if you're not careful. So what does it mean? David is not delivered from the consequences of his sin. Like I said earlier, Absalom, Adonijah, his sons, they all rebel against him in one form or another. And he probably loses some face before the people here. But he just takes it on the chin and just continues to put his faith in God. And this was, it's interesting to see when you read through this. This was during a time when we don't see him inquiring of God. And that becomes a problem. And that's a problem for Christians even. What does it mean to be forgiven of a sin by God today? Well, it's very much the same thing. God expects us to take responsibility of our sin and do away with our lust for it and letting it capture us, letting it control us. Now, it doesn't mean that we are always successful all the time. That's why we have Jesus. Jesus died one time so that we don't have to continue doing these sacrifices. And we can look at that sacrifice and understand who our God is. Okay, thank you so much for stopping by. We're going to get into it. We're going to continue in this series of the Kings, which is this part of a walk through the Bible. Thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next one. So that we don't have